All right, I'm looking through these questions. So tell me that last thing, because I wasn't doing that to preach, but tell me this thing about Elijah and the drought and stuff. I just think it's key. We got to understand some things here. So, and I think that'll help you help people. So, Beth, you guys, does that make sense on this thing with Elijah and the drought? And if he had have misread what was happening, he would have responded incorrectly and missed the provision. And so I don't think that's complicated or hard, but it's not the same as God didn't drop manna from heaven. They didn't just go out in their front yard and one day there was all this provision from God there.
The widow would have missed her provision.
And that's a good point. The widow had to hear God. Oh, that's good. And she had to hear God in a way she'd never heard before.
I think sometimes God stretches us that way. Even we can become so focused on the preparation that we miss, okay, God can do it. We just have to listen to His instruction.
Right.
Sometimes we focus on a natural thing, and that's not that we wouldn't, but might not be the whole picture.
Yes. Yes. She's best talking about seeing the whole picture and that God's stretching us and those kind of things, and that the widow had to respond correctly too.
I think even in what is maybe to come, that maybe we see what's coming. I would think a big part of the Christian community doesn't see that.
Correct.
And it will take the wipe out for them to really okay, God. Right.
Yeah. The point that Beth's sharing is that even in the Christian,
they trust in our wealth or in our prosperity because we've heard that message in the church.
Yes.
But it's like you're not really even trusting in God in that. It gets to an extreme where you're trusting in your own abilities. Right.
Beth's bringing out the point that the majority, from her one perspective, is that even the majority of Christians don't see these things that we're talking about, and so that it may very well take, for lack of a better word, calamity. Am I right? There's what you're saying, to really, really, really get the nation to a place of turning. I've always resisted that thought because I've always said the church can mature without persecution or whatever. I'm beginning to think maybe I'm wrong about that. I've always said, hey, come on, and Reformation's going to. So now Reformation may save us before it matures us, kind of. So, but anyway, that it may take something. What was the other part that you were saying? That those of us who do get it, I don't know. I was thinking you said something on the tail end of that.
Kind of, as far as the widow's perspective, about receiving their provision by letting go of things.
Yeah. And then the thing about the widow, that she had to let go of what seemed like the very most important thing to her, and yet that opened the door to supernatural, to a miracle, and so again, I think there's a real reality there. You think about it, she was on the verge of death. She said, we're going to eat this and then we die. So it didn't mean like, okay, this is the last last food we've got, and so 90 days from now we'll die. She's like, this is it. And so in other words, they were already at the point where they were on the verge of starvation, and that little handful is all they had left. and so in the middle of doing that, it's anyway, that's against everything in human nature. That survival spirit, that will to live, she absolutely had to find of grace, find something to override that. And there's a word I'm looking for that I can't grasp, of desperation. When we can't wrap our Western minds around it. I've never even come close to starving, but then that thing of that instinct, she had to override her own human instinct to like, how could, no way, because your instinct, it takes over. It's not your intellectual. It comes out of that fight or flight instinct. And she had to override that, and to give of that to the prophet. So that's a principle. What Beth's making the point is that, not only is this about Elijah, it was about the widow, and she had to apprehend something from God to be able to do that. But then when she did, it released her supernatural provision as well.
It was like a sacrifice.
Indeed, it was a sacrifice. Yes, yeah. And I hesitate sometimes. See, yes, I mean sacrifice in the literal sense, but I guess because we've heard so many sermons and messages that use those terminologies, I'm looking for new terminology. I'm looking for new ways to articulate that, because sacrifice is right, but in our culture it's not strong enough anymore because we've overused it. It's a sacrifice for me to let you have the best, this chair instead of whatever. Instead of that's my chair, you can.
Instead of getting a new car.
Yeah.
So we don't have one at all.
Exactly. So yes.
When you were talking about Jezebel, the false prophet.
Yes.
I know the definition, I just can't conceptualize a false prophet. It also says beware of false prophets in the end days.
Exactly.
But
we're talking about questions about false prophets.
What would one look like? Would they be speaking a lie, or is there any power behind their...
Both. There can be.
What would be just a hypothetical?
Just a quick definition of how to recognize a false prophet, or a false apostle, or a false, for example, a few years ago, my friend Barbara Wintrouble, who's a real prophetess, she wrote a book about lying signs and wonders. And at the time, I'm like, Barbara, we can't even get the real ones. And you're writing a book about how to recognize, how to, beware the false ones. So I'm like, I was kind of frustrated with her, frankly. I was like, Barbara, well, hello, she's a prophetess. She's writing it before we need it. I mean, really. Yeah. And so now we're seeing that. But the thing about false prophets, and especially, is that normally they don't walk in and start just spouting error and heresy. It's mingled, it's seductive, it's subtle, it's not necessarily great big in your face. It's got deception in it. It's a mingling. It's almost always a mingling. And listen, false prophets are not always, how shall I say? It's not like a false prophet's not always a non-born-again, demon-sent. False prophets are usually good prophets that have gone bad. And that's what makes it hard.
But I guess a lot of times they'll use their
gift
thing for personal gain or some other agenda.
Yeah, and if it goes far enough, he's talking about, Paul saying that they use their gift or use their anointing for personal gain, and that could be the beginning of it. But a real false prophetess or false prophet, there is a counterfeit supernatural thing that works, but it doesn't always start there. And so that's what makes it hard, because it's usually mingled with truth. It's got truth in it. The garden, the story, there was truth mingled in it, and so if you look at the cults, they've all got some truth in there. But the tainting and the mingling, and if it goes far enough, and that person gives themselves to that, and I don't think you can do that without knowing you're doing that, but as you give yourself to that and let that thing carry you, then you move into a realm of the Spirit that you begin to operate in more of a familiar spirit and demon spirits instead of the true spirit. But it's all mingled up and tainted, because normally, or most of the time, that person started out as a real prophet, or could have been a real prophet. And so not everything, and you guys know this, not everything that's supernatural comes from God. But most of the culture, buy into it. If it's supernatural, they think, it must be from God. And that creeps into the church at times. And again, when we were talking about mystical union and the new mystics and some of those books, the young generation are very, very vulnerable to false prophets, false apostles, false signs and wonders, because they've hardly seen the real. And they're so hungry, which is a God thing, they're so hungry for the real, it makes them vulnerable to the false. And so we have to watch out for that. But false prophets, so there's that aspect of the false teaching and the false words, but there's also false anointings that can contain supernatural elements. And so, that it talks about that. Paul warned of false apostles. And apostles, a lot of times, especially in his day, moved in miracles. And so, again, that thing of just because something's supernatural doesn't mean it's from God. And so, yes, sir.
Why does it seem like Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire? But it seems like Elisha, his ending was totally different. Could it have been something?
I don't think so. The question is, how come Elijah, the end of his life wasn't glorious, like being caught up in a chariot of fire like Elijah did? There was some negative, yeah. I don't remember about the sickness, but I think the thing with Elijah was more the point that his life was so out of the ordinary and extraordinary. Elisha. And forgive me, my mind's a little bit blank at the moment. His life ended, but it didn't end in bad. Like he didn't get off into sin or backslide or whatever. But how many people in history got caught up in the chariots of fire? Come on, So I think the point God was making was that the exclamation point of extraordinary calling, extraordinary anointing on Elijah's life. And the way, because we don't know where Elijah came from anyway. There's no history of his beginning, his parents. The Bible just says Elijah the Tishbite.
Yeah.
Like, well, what the heck's a Tishbite? Where is Tish at? Is he from Tish or?
The land of Tish.
Yeah.
To this day, they are still water bearers and all those.
Yeah.
Those.
Yeah. Exactly. So elements. So I'm going to move to this about what about elements is fellowship time? How much fellowship time, or what about food, worship, prayer? How do you consistency, time issues? What are elements that should not be compromised? I think all of those issues, time, children are always an issue. There's just not a perfect way. I don't think any of it all matters, but I think you have to just find what works about time and what day and all those things. That all depends on what kind of wineskin you're birthing. The most important part is, because all of that you just have to work it out. You just have to work it out. And it depends in a lot. Depends on who and what your focus is. But on the elements that should not be compromised, again, let's just say it's couponing. Because that's what I probably know the least about. As far as the whole thing, I'm skeptical about. If they're issuing a bunch of coupons, I'm like, okay, but when I go in there, is the price going up? Right? Come on. I've been in a lot of deals through the years. But I think what should not be compromised is the things that you are the most passionate about, and certainly the issue of kingdom purpose. What is this kingdom purpose? How is this connected to something? If we're doing this coupon, we're having these groups, okay, why are we wanting to save this money? Or why are we wanting to get this group together? What's the goal here? And then we make that goal connect to kingdom purpose, either within that group or without. Are we doing this so that we're then going to in turn reach out and do something? Or are we as a group, this is our focus, and then we want things like prayer and Bible study. All of that is up to you and the Holy Spirit. But the things that can't be compromised on is this intentional, consistent connection to whatever it is we're doing. As wild and crazy as it can be, it's got to be connected to kingdom purposes. And again, that connects to what's God saying. I don't want to be doing something and it be just a good thing when God's speaking to the whole church and the whole earth, or God's speaking to the church in my nation, and He's saying some real clear things, and I'm off over here doing something that's not even connected, or it may be, and it won't be like the trap is you wouldn't be doing anything bad, you'd just be doing something good, and then the next thing, and I'm just going to say this to make a point, I'm not trying to be legalistic, but when David brought the Ark of the Covenant back in the Old Testament, and he built the tabernacle of David, and you know the story, there was the manifested presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant was there, and it was not behind a veil, it was not hidden, and David was dancing and celebrating, and there was no sacrifice except the sacrifice of praise. Well, it was only 6 miles, if I remember right, it was only 5 or 6 miles to Shiloh, where the tabernacle of Moses was still set up, and the priesthood was still sacrificing offerings. The structure was still there. The procedures were still in place. The rituals, if you will, were still going on, and the presence of God wasn't even there. And I know we've heard lots of, again, that's one of those things that becomes cliche, but 5 miles away, David and the presence of God and the ark of God's presence was in the tabernacle of David, and God was speaking to a nation in the tabernacle of David and changing history. Now later, that was just a window that opened. We didn't stay with the tabernacle of David. Later, the ark went back, and they went back into the tabernacle, and then eventually they built the temple. But I don't want to be in Shiloh operating as a priest in an empty building, so to speak. And I'm not saying God, removes His presence, but I'm just saying good sometimes is the enemy of best. I'll just stop there. So I think one of the main thing is to keep it connected to some specific strategic and intentional kingdom purpose. Tiffany, for example, I keep coming back to this thing about you guys and you blessing these businesses and sending and having intercession for businesses to prosper. You're not only trying to just lead them to Jesus, but what Tiffany's doing in Claremore House of Prayer, and she wears lots of hats and's got lots of. She's spiritually pregnant with about 5 or 6 things, and we're going to see them all birthed and blessed. Hallelujah. And and so I'm honored to be her covering in those things. And when I was there in the conference, and we stood them up and commissioned them. You understand? Because again, there's that intentional, relational connection with the apostolic and the prophetic in real relationships. But what they're doing in their business model is this is just one. But they sent intercessors, and Tiffany, you can send something, or we need a way to, anyway, you can share this. But they started reaching out to businesses in their communities and saying to their businesses, we're praying for you to prosper. We're praying for your business to be blessed. We're praying for your business to succeed and not fail. And as part of praying for the community, we're praying for you. And here's a gift from us to you. And it had a card with a blessing on it. It was a gift basket. And so now think about this. And I probably can't articulate as good as Tiffany can, but here's what grabbed me about that is that in our culture, in education, in media, in the culture, in our young people, everything about business is negative because the culture is bombarding us, and this administration has a socialist economic perspective, and so if you're going to be a successful businessman, the only way for you to have been successful, if you've made money, if your business has done good, if you've started new businesses and then you started another one, then you must be greedy and you must be corrupt and all of those things. So how much of what an incredible kingdom purpose, reaching out to businesses, and yeah, we want them to, if they're greedy, they need to get saved, you know what I'm saying? But they're reaching out to the business saying, we want you to know that we're believing for you to prosper. OMG. When's the last time you saw that happen? Never. I mean, we all think it, but we haven't done anything about it. You know what I'm saying? And remember the deal with Chick-fil-A back last year? How wonderful was that? Man, we've never seen anything like that. A movement, we the people rose up. So there's these models and there's these expressions and, you know. And so Tiffany's, for example, has purposely not created a 501c3, a tax-exempt nonprofit. She's going a different route because she wants to be able, this is just what's been in her heart about one aspect of their ministry. She wants to be able to go in and say to the city council if she needs to, hey, we purposely want our property or want our building or whatever it is on the tax rolls so that we can we want to sow into the tax base. I mean, wow. And I'm not saying, and see, that's not a template that everybody's supposed to do. But in her, but where she's at, what God's saying. And so again, but that's very connected. That's very connected to the kingdom purposes of God in the nation right now. Because we're being taught, for one thing, we're being taught that that prosperity is immoral. That wealth and success is immoral. And so we've lost the cultural mind. We've lost the cultural battle because especially the young generation, because they're products of public education, because they're being taught that at college level, that socialism as an economic model is the most moral way to have the economy of a nation, which, by the way, completely goes against the Bible. Different class, different setting, we won't go there. But free markets, free enterprise, freedom to buy and sell, freedom to create, freedom to make a profit, freedom to create wealth is the biblical pattern for nations and economies. It's the biblical pattern. And so socialism isn't just inaccurate, it's deceptive, it's demonic, it's contra-biblical. So I'll get off of that. So does that make sense? So on the business thing, I've been talking to another lady I know in our area, and she's gotten real involved in the business. She's a retail manager, and so she's in it. She's not in Austin, but she's in one of the surrounding communities. And I've been saying to her, well, you know, your real heart is for San Marcos, and so you know you don't have to come and have a thing for Austin like I do. For me, it's all one big picture, you know. So she's been getting involved in the downtown business stuff and the Chamber of Commerce and all of those things. And I'm saying to her, hey, how long do you think it'll be before you're holding a business lunch and you're convening it or hosting it or whatever, and you're having some sort of luncheon for business leaders where somebody's giving their testimony and you're inviting people in, or maybe it's in a house meeting. What if business leaders were going to come together once a week or once a month and prayed for the community, prayed for the economy, prayed, you know, and I mean, it's open-ended. Anything can happen out of that. What about trading business strategies? What about, you know, one of the things about having Josephs in the gate, remember I talked about that earlier today, about Josephs in the gate? One of the things about having Josephs in the gate, and you guys were talking a little bit about this in San Antonio, is that out of a men's fellowship, everybody in the men's fellowship knew which guy had a business, and hey, this guy needs a job, and well, we know this guy over here, and hey, he needs a job. Well, this guy over here can help with that, put him to work, and he needs a place to stay. Well, we know another guy, he can help him have a place to stay. And so that one thing can lead to another. And so having Joseph's in the gate, so why would we not, as business leaders, come to the table and say, hey, let's talk about what we can do in our community? And it might not be about hunger or poverty, but it could be, what if it was about, hey, what can we do to... it could just be anything. As business leaders, what can we do to support each other? Who has what resources? What can we, and depending on if they're already all Christians or if they're not, or who you're wanting to reach, or some Christians start it, pull the others in, pray over their businesses. Share with them why it wouldn't have to be the focus, but you can share why God wants your business to succeed. Or here's the You know, I mean, there's some good resources around that have been around a long time. You know, Dennis Peacock stuff and Doing Business God's Ways book and other stuff. But that's just a starting place. Then anywhere, it can go anywhere. I was up in Salem, Massachusetts, the witch place, right, years ago. And so they took me to a building, the intercessors, thank God. So they took me to this 2 or 3 story building. It wasn't real wide, but it was tall. And at one time, the witches openly met there, and the building was painted completely black on the outside. They painted it black on the outside. And the building's old, has gargoyles. I mean, it looked, you know, I could just picture it. It looked creepy. You know, and they had seances, and there was always some kind of occult meetings going on in those buildings right downtown in the square in Salem, Massachusetts. They hung their sign out, and the pagan groups would meet there, and the witch groups would meet there, and there was all this stuff going on in these buildings. And everybody would complain about it, and everybody's like, you know, how bad that is. So some of the men joined with the intercessors and some of the pastors, and they just began to pray over that building. But the group, as they met, it was always about, we're targeting that building. The focus group of this house meeting, if I remember right, it was a house meeting, was they come together as they targeted that building. They said, we're going to pray, and we believe that God's going to show us a way that building is going to come out of the hands of the pagans and into the hands of the church. And so they prayed, and I don't remember how long it took. But eventually, the finances dried up, and that building went up for sale. And that group raised the money, prayed in, targeted, prayed in the money, raised the money, and they bought that building and remodeled it, painted it white. And when they took me to it, this building was painted white on purpose, and they had some kind of something in it that was, you know, Christian, and then some kind of outreach thing, and I don't remember if there was a food deal, but it was, you know, that's not exactly a new thing. But the fact is that you know, there are so many things like that and beyond that God is going to begin to bring forth. And so I feel an unction here for a moment just to address this thing about safe houses. Because I do want to talk. Are we good? I do need to interject here just a little bit about, I don't want to not get this covered on something about legal issues. I don't have a lot here. I just want to get this up and out. Is that all right, you guys? Are we tracking here? And this thing with safe houses, and I already said this, but especially, first of all, emotionally. More than ever before, people are fatherless spiritually. And out of that, and especially young adults, they're spiritually fatherless. And obviously in America we have a natural problem in broken homes and fatherlessness and that thing, and it all connects. But there's an increasing need for there to be places where people can build real relationships and real community, if you will, where they're safe to be themselves, to talk about anything, to be released in the gifts, to be able to pray, share, prophesy, whatever you fill in the blank there. But we need places where people are safe. And first of all, that means safe from rejection, safe from misunderstanding, safe from falling through the cracks, safe from isolation. And we need a new kind of house meeting. Boy, I mean, I run out of words. I'm asking God to help me articulate new language. I mean, literally, we need new language. I've gotten close to a dear man named William Word, and he's a prophet. and he's, in most people's worlds, he's a nameless, faceless guy, and he's one of the most articulate men I've ever met. But I found out as he and I shared some deep things together a couple of times that he said, you know, God, he said, you know, Bob, he said, I spend a lot of time asking God to empower me with articulate prophetic language that's specific, not prophesying, but prophetic in the sense that the specific words and terms and phrases would be given to him by God to define, describe, communicate, and articulate truth that's right now prophetic truth in ways and in terms and in phrases that are so clear for right now, but they're not the ones we're used to hearing. He said, I spend a lot of time. He lives alone. He's never been married. He doesn't have kids. His health is very bad. He was in a horrible wreck 8 or 9 years ago. Spent 2 years in a hospital. The crushing physically and emotionally, just God has done some things in him I've never quite seen before, and he just kind of amazes me at times. And that has really stuck with me, this thing about the need for a language that can articulate. And it's really challenged me, see. It's really stretched me, even in the natural. I'm like, man, you know, I need to be more careful and more alert and to give more effort to using real specific words and terms to define, to make the effort to in God, so that God can give us new terms, new languages to help define all the new things He's doing. I really believe that, so I just put that out to you. You know, my vocabulary, I grew up, you know all that stuff. And next thing you know, your language, your vocabulary is full of words like that, and stuff, and and how many times are you saying that? And so anyway, it's really challenged me.
Tony Blair is supposed to have a place in Texas. He really is.
Tony Blair.
Yeah, from he's in the U.S. now, but
Really?
yeah. Tony Blair.
What's that? Paul has somehow in this, I know this is going somewhere in the middle of this bit about language, that Tony Blair's moved to Texas, right?
Yeah.
It's okay.
He was very eloquent.
Oh, yeah, he is. Yes, yeah. We're talking about Tony Blair just because he is a good example of somebody that's very articulate, very intentional about the words and terms. I used to listen to him a lot.
Yeah.
I did. He came down on the wrong side sometimes, but man, he was articulate. So I get what you're saying. Some of it you just get by intentionality, but because Texas is a Goshen, but we won't go there. That's a prophetic word from Chuck and others, and prophets and intercessors are hearing that everywhere. And Glenn Beck, anyway, the Mormon prophet believes that Texas is like the place to be. I don't know. And so, anyway, we need a new language. And so forgive me for that, but we need that, because some of you have that. Some of you have that in you, and you just don't think you do, and you have to be intentional about. I never think about saying, "Okay, God, literally give me a word here that's not necessarily in my vocabulary right now, or hasn't been, or to articulate things."
I've heard God saying, "Be really particular about the words you use, and just maybe even purposely get away from the Christian lingo."
Exactly.
Because it's become so that it's
Exactly.
even,
Doesn't mean anything.
right.
Yeah. Beth's making the point. That we just overuse certain phrases over and over and over, and then they get anyway. So I'm trying to be diligent enough to remember to do that and say, okay, God. I was pausing here because I was trying to think of a quote, and it's not just Revelation, but anyway, I was thinking there was a quote here from Bill. One day he said, and I'll probably mess it up by quoting, he said, oh yeah, I don't have it in the email. I have a notebook. I take notes when I'm on the phone at home. I have a spiral notebook that every time I'm on the phone I have names, dates, places, and written records of what we talked about. He said, Bob, I'm inclined to the Holy Spirit. He said, Bob, I've inclined my heart so that God might speak to my spirit by His Spirit. And he said something else that was just so articulate. Well, and that's not a big, profound thing, but just the fact, by the way he used the word inclined, he was using it in a very Old Testament kind of way. I've inclined myself. It's like I've chosen, I've postured, I've purposely. Anyway, enough about that. But you know what I'm saying? So there's language that we need to do, and he's been a real voice. I'm looking at the list of questions. And let me address these legal issues a little bit, because I'm talking about this thing about safe houses. So people need those places where they're safe, and they need to feel safe, and it just dawned on me how rare that is. A couple of years ago, I was sharing about, I began to hear God say, like I'll never forget one night, I was just at it happened to me once at Northgate and once at Southgate in our ministry, and I just heard God say, you're safe here. And my intellect said, well, of course I'm safe here. But then I was like, what? And I heard the Lord say, you're safe here. And it wasn't like God defined that, but I began to feel safe because of what I was hearing Him say on the inside of me. And so you know how that works in the Spirit. It wasn't like anything my intellect didn't exactly already know. But I began to, and so in this, there was instantly this gentle, there was this fatherly affection that rose up in me as I opened my eyes and sort of looked around the room while everybody else was worshiping and had their eyes closed. And so there was, so then in me all of a sudden there was just this desire, like I would with my kids. It's like, man, I want these guys to be safe. Lord, I want them to be safe. And it affected me. And then it kind of, and I never heard terms. I never got all this stuff, and I purposely didn't let my intellect go there, because I was like, my nature's like, well, God, what does that mean? And does that mean this is going to happen in safe which way? And, the prepper thing and the blah, 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 blah. And it was kind of like I just couldn't go there. I knew enough to know not go there. Don't let my intellect kick in. You're safe here. And I just kind of looked around, and I just felt the Father's heart. I guess is what it was. But in me, I felt it, and I was like, boy, Lord, I want them to be safe. I want your people to be safe, and I want them to have a safe place. And the next thing I knew, I was praying this. Now, hear me. The next thing I knew, I found myself praying, Lord, we need more safe places. I don't know why that's a thing with me. I mean, my testimony, I was like back, just don't even talk to me about house meetings and blah, blah, blah. But I'm telling you, there was something in me, and I just began to see houses and places where people were gathered, and they were, and nobody's perfect, and this seldom happens, but they were all warm and fuzzy and sweet, and but it was not about what's going on in them. It was about that they were safe emotionally. That's a whole thing in itself. But also then, and also then, JD, like later, I was beginning to pray over it, and but they were safe physically. That right now, the best place to be under the radar is in houses. Now the enemy's trying to get ahead of us here because there's already some legal issues across the country about house meetings. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but and so regardless of what kind of house meeting you're doing, that's a safe place. Now I have some things in me that I'm not called to do. But the Lord began to remind me when I first got saved in the early 70s, the very first charismatic church in our town were mostly Missouri Synod Lutherans who got kicked out of the Missouri Synod Church over tongues. The pastor had gotten filled with the Spirit and language of the Spirit and got kicked out. So they actually started the very first non-denominational independent charismatic church in our city. And they eventually, it was in just a year or two, so this was like 1973, 1974, they bought some property right on the edge of town. Wasn't great property. And so out in that area there were some homes kind of scattered around within a couple. It wasn't like a subdivision. It was like, there was a house and a half acre over here, and a quarter of a mile away there's another house, and there was kind of an area. I won't even call it a subdivision. And those guys all began to buy houses in that area on purpose. And boy, did most people think that was just too weird. 73, you just didn't do that. I mean, if you did, what are you going to do? A hippie commune out there? But they called it the Way of the Cross, named the church that way. And and people started buying and moving close together. And the Lord just began to remind me through the years things I'd seen. And so I think in the sense of safe houses, I think it can go to the place where people, so let me just run some stuff at you real quick here. Okay, one issue is that all over the nation, cities and counties are going broke because they've overspent and they've convinced the voters to let them do with tax things nobody can afford. And so the next thing you know, even a city is bankrupt or a county is bankrupt. And so then the tax rate in certain counties, like I tried to voice a voice up in the Pflugerville and some of that area. There were 5 different taxing entities up in that part of the region that had the ability to all raise the taxes, and they're puzzled. And that if all 5 of them raise the taxes, people are going to be like, OMG. So what happens is people start talking about, okay, we're all going to move out of this county. We're all going to move out of this county and relocate somewhere. And obviously people are coming to Texas from, the West Coast and New England because of the economy, taxes, etc. So I think in that we've got to see the big picture. And I think now's the time. I'm just saying now's the time. I know, Beth, you guys you've had a thing in your heart to get some land, not for the purpose of that, but in getting the land, you wanted to have the freedom to have a place to hold meetings or for it to be a safe house or an apostolic hub or whatever it might be, a barn burning, I don't know. And so safe houses, I think my point in that is that we need to be aware that God may be speaking to some people about living close to each other or about our safe houses being physically safe. Like for example, real quick, I live in San Marcos. People ask me all the time, why in the world don't you move into Austin? Well, because the house I live in San Marcos, it only has 1,700 square feet in it, but it's got a big front porch across it. It's got a great back porch in the back. It's on an acre. It's a beautiful little acre. I'm not in an HOA. Hello? I'm not in an HOA. 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 I live outside the city limits. I'm not in an HOA. I live outside the city limits. And so
you're not in a dumpy neighborhood, and you still don't live in.
And I'm not, the dumpiest house in our whole neighborhood is next door to me, with the 3 or 4 of their junky old Trans Ams. But anyway, I will take liberty over pretty anytime. And the other thing is about my house is, that same place, if you could even find such a thing in Austin, would be $350,000 to $400,000. Those places like that in San Marcos can be bought for like $175,000. So, and I've been in that house 12 years. I can't afford to leave. I can't afford to move to Austin. Okay, but the other thing is I'm not in an HOA. No, I'm not in an HOA. But you can also. You can park about 10 or 12 cars. Now listen, you can park about 10 or 12 cars in my driveway and area. You can easily park 10 or 12 cars. And where I'm at, so far, nobody's going to say a word. Nobody cares, Because there's no HOA. Because there's no HOA. And the people on the other side of me who are good people, they're hardly ever there. They own another place. They're gone all the time. The guy that lives across the street from me and over a little bit, he got married and left that home. He's just sitting there. And so I'm a safe place. I'm just not close to anybody. You guys are welcome to come to my house, but and so safe houses, we got to start thinking about things like that. I'm not talking about getting paranoid and stuff, but I am saying, okay, let's take into account, and if you're going to buy a house or if you're thinking about something, let's take into account how much limitations might be imposed on us, and let's avoid all of them that we can. Let's avoid all of them that we can.
Number one criteria, no age.
Yeah, it's a real deal. I mean, I'm trying to stir up the legislators about these HOAs. They had to go through the legislature last session to take away some of the power of homeowners associations, because in Texas for a while they could come after you if you come after your home if you were behind on your HOA fees.
Exactly.
They could repossess your house.
We knew one person that it happened to.
And so these folks are saying they knew somebody that happened in San Antonio. So they changed that in Texas, by the way. But it took an awakening among conservatives to change that through the
They
legislature.
added others.
Yeah, there's all
to
kinds.
them too.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of. So is there a question, comment there? Okay.
What do you do when in the safe house someone reveals that their family is doing something illegal? How do you keep your group safe and at the same time make sure everyone's honoring the law?
Wow.
Slightly paraphrasing.
Is the person whose family's breaking the law, are they the host?
Yeah, that's what I understood. Not only put in their spot, but
Yeah, I want to double check on that.
it's specific what they're doing if you were to look at it.
Well, is it okay to? Right. Is it okay?
Okay.
No, yeah. No, I mean, I'm going to ask them, whoever. Can we talk about this openly and specifically in public here, guys? This will be archived. This will be archived. No, this is awesome. This is good, but we want to deal with it rightly.
It takes a little while for your response.
I'll take a look here.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that the host?
I'm guessing so. No.
Or just somebody in the group?
No.
Which no. No, they're not the host?
Or no, not.
No, we can't. Okay.
It didn't say, it said no.
Okay. Is the issue we're talking about where the law is being broken, is that going on in the house that the meeting's at? This is good. No, this is good. Thank God. Okay. In light of what I understand from the situation, I would say the group needs to move. And you'll just have to find a way to do that.
Should there be some sort of excommunication or should? No, it's not the host. Yes, we can discuss it. Okay.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not the host. Yes, we can discuss it.
Okay, good. It's not the host. That helps. Because, man, this is where the rubber meets the road. See, this stuff preaches by the mile, lives by the inch. So the question's about, some pretty severe laws being broke. But if it's not the host, so somebody's just in the group and that person's doing this in their house or their family or, okay. Well, then that person needs to be lovingly confronted. And see, that goes into some other issues about leadership. I kind of want to finish up. This is connected to legal, but it also goes to leadership issues. Because whatever group we form, whatever the focus is, whatever God births, you're never going to get away from the fact that there's got to be leadership. And leadership then always raises the eternal question: who's in authority and how much authority do they have? And because that's a biblical principle and you can't get away from it. So in this situation, regardless, if there's not a structure, so to speak, if there's not any kind of defined leadership, if it's not a team, if this is just a group of people meeting together and you know, they're just coming to worship and pray together and there's not any specific focus, or you know what I'm saying, there's not this agenda, or in the good sense, I mean, if there's not an established leadership, there may be just somebody hosting it, or maybe somebody's just the leader or the facilitator. You understand what I'm saying? Some groups are like that. There's like a 912 group, they're not going to have somebody, because it's not a biblical thing. There's just people getting together. They're peers. They're all peers. And there's a facilitator, and that person is the host, and he kind of guides the meeting. But he's not an authority, and he doesn't have any authority to speak into anybody's life. So if your group is like that, and you know that somebody's, you know, cooking crank in the backyard on their own time, there may not be any established leadership roles. But if you're friends, even as brothers, you have the relational authority as a peer to go, two of you who know it for a fact, you got to know your facts, and two of you need to go and lovingly confront that person and say, hey, we're here just as friends, we're here just as brothers, we're here, our sisters, because we love you, but we know that this is going on, and you have to do something about this. You've got to, if you're doing it, you got to quit, you know.
For the safeness, it's, surely they know what they're doing is not right, and maybe they're in that situation because they want to be confronted in a loving way.
Right.
Don't just call the police on me and have me hauled off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's my point is that the two people go to confront them. You're not going to just, hey, let's call the cops and turn them in. You're going to confront them. That's what Paul talked about. It's like, you know, and I'm not saying if somebody commits murder, we don't go to the courts, but he's saying when there's disputes among you. So it just goes to the Matthew 18 principle and others that if somebody, if your brother sins, a witness, you go and you lovingly confront them on a personal, discreet basis, and you begin to, and you got to go there. You just got to go there. You got to go there. You can't leave it undone.
It looks like that this meeting started with a confession, that they were doing something.
Okay, and they confess that in front of the whole group?
That's what it sounds like. When it says, what do you do when in the house, say house, someone reveals that they're family. Someone reveals that they're family.
Is doing this. Well, yeah.
It's a lot to the group that he would feel safe enough to confess it.
Right. And Beth's bringing out the point, that's a huge thing about this person feeling safe enough that they could confess and know that they're not going to be like, you know, hey, we're gonna handcuff you while we wait for the cops, kind of deal, you know. So respond in that way. Respond as, you know, in the receiving the confession and then holding them accountable. I mean, are they opening up? Or they want help? Or they want ministry? Then walk with them in that. But they have to know that at some point, you know, you can't be party to hiding something that dramatic as somebody cooking crank somewhere. That at some point, if it's because if it's, you know, that stuff's dangerous and those places blow up all the time, kill people and stuff. And so, you know, so walk this person out if you can. But that's, in one sense, that's a beautiful example of what a safe house is. So sorry it took us. There's a big delay in the electronic aspect of this, and so
She clarified it's the family. It's the family, not the individual.
that's even better. Yeah. And that makes it more difficult. It's a family member. There's a person that's a member of the group, and it's not that person breaking the law, but that person's family in their house, I guess, is doing this. And so that person, if they're not, and it may be a husband or it may be a wife, I don't know, but you know, eventually that person may have to get out of that place. There's all kind, but you do. Since he or she confessed it, you know, I wouldn't continually talk about it as a group because you're going to get 100 opinions. Whoever the kind of organic leaders are, or whoever has the most relationship with that person, a couple of you deal with this situation in private. Amen. Tough situation, but awesome. I mean, but it's awesome. That's what we, that's what we're dealing with.
And that's where real deliverance will come for this person that's in this situation.
Exactly.
Repeat the
Comment is that in that there's real deliverance. That's how these kind of relationships and settings. That's how real deliverance can come in that person's life. So just real quick, let me talk about these legal issues. I'm not going to talk about persecution so much, but you guys do need to be aware that there are there have been some very targeted legal issues about home meetings around the country, and also in the issues. One issue, and we won't go there, is just that more and more, like public institutions like schools are getting very negative towards church groups renting their facilities and et cetera. And so the bottom line is if a thing like a school, if they rent any of their facilities to any kind of outside groups, they have to rent to all outside groups. UT's been getting away with that for years and years and years by handpicking who they let, and they always are. I remember years ago I went in and we tried to rent one of their buildings to have a rally call meeting in, and this lady just looked at me and said, we would never, kind of hands on it, we would never let that happen. So those kind of things are on the increase, but most of those are easy. They're challenged by, easy to challenge by the Liberty Institute will help people in that. ACLJ will help in those kind of deals. American Center for Law and Justice. What I want to talk about real quick before we take a break is there are, and you can Google some of this. I just need you to know that, for example, quite a few years ago, not too many, let's see, 11, well, yes, it has been 11. About 11 years ago, Les and I leased a house in San Marcos, a nice house. And the guy we were leasing from, and we went through a realtor. He had his house leased through a realtor. And so we were walking through the house, and he was with us, and he was kind of sizing us up. He was an older guy, church-going guy, older couple, good church members. And he understood that I was a minister, pastor, whatever language. And so we were going to lease this house. And he said, while we were standing there, and the leasing agent was standing there with us in the house, he said, now I don't want a bunch of cars here, and I don't want you guys having a bunch of church meetings and Bible studies in this house. Or religious meetings, maybe, but I think he said Bible studies. And before I could answer, the leasing agent, God bless her, warm and smiley, she said, oh, now, Mr. So-and-so, she said they have the right to do anything like that they want to. You can't, and pat, and it fixed it. But I just thought, wow. Here's a guy that goes to church every Sunday, and he said, no, I don't want no. Well, maybe his thing was just slip of mind, whatever. But around the country, there's an increasing number of lawsuits filed against people having church and stuff in their meetings. A couple of them have made publicity that they weren't doing such a great job. But here's the thing you need to watch out for, and I want to get off of this. Watch out for zoning. Watch out for zoning laws. Be aware of what's going on in your city. Watch out for zoning laws. Obviously, nobody's going to pass a law that's against Christianity. But what they will do is they'll pass a city ordinance. They'll pass a city ordinance about parking, or about traffic in the neighborhood. And did I mention HOAs? Watch out for these HOAs, because if you've got too many cars parked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you're making decisions, or you're helping people make decisions, or you're praying about birthing something, be very aware of things like zoning. Because the next thing you know, they'll be coming and saying, oh, you can't have 7 cars parked in front of your house, or on the street, or wherever. You know, yeah, see, and so it goes on, and so
You can't take your garbage can out until the day that
right, on and on and on as far as HOA is ridiculous.
you want to sleep in.
Common sense goes out the window, et cetera, on that. But watch out for zoning, watch out for HOAs. And here's the other thing. Apartment complexes, and my daughter's a property manager. She manages 3 different properties. Watch out for these apartment deals, because apartment complexes tend to have more and more rules all the time. And and most people tend to not question them. Karen's HOA, off the apartments back to the HOA, and Karen and Art's subdivision, the HOA, because some people got frustrated about door guys, so the HOA was going to say, well, we won't let anybody come and knock on anybody's door in the neighborhood and da. And so when the community email came through Karen, she's like, wait a minute, this is a constitutional issue. You can't do this. And by the way, I might not want the Avon person, but I might want the Austin American person to knock on my door and want to sell me something. We can't just make this big blanket thing, because that takes my rights away. I might want somebody to come knock on my door. And so everybody, and so Karen just brought some comment, and all kinds of people went, oh, we hadn't thought of that. They were just going to buy into it. So watch out. If you're in an HOA, if you buy property in one, stay alert. Stay alert. You don't have to give your life to it, but just stay on top of it. Pay attention. The other thing is apartments. More and more people are living in apartments. And I went off without the notes of it. But there are some ministries birthing that are designed to go into apartment complexes and move into them, and become missionaries into apartment complexes. Years ago, we ran into a thing when I was doing the cell groups or whatever. But we also had a college group, and so we were going to do a meeting somewhere. And so I sent a bunch of college students, and we went through a big old they went through a big old complex and put out about 300 or 400 flyers on the doors, Well, the next thing you know, they're calling me saying, you can't, not only can you not do this, you're going to have to come back and pick them all up. And so I lost that battle. I tried, but I lost that battle. I had to send a team back and go pick up all those flyers. So watch out on these apartment complexes. But because here's the thing. If somebody starts a house meeting in an apartment complex, parking is the number one issue. There's no place to park. And I don't care what anybody says, and you can just let me, this will be the only place I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think there's a spirit in that. Obviously, part of it's just a little bit of greed because they don't buy enough property to put a bunch of extra parking spaces. But watch out, because parking's a real deal. Listen, I've been to a couple of meetings and here and there, and man, there was no place to park in the entire complex. We were about ready to leave and drive the 40 miles back home. We could not get in that. There wasn't no place to park. Nice townhome type places, apartments and stuff. And just as we were about to give up, some people came out of their deal and got in the car and left, and it wasn't one of theirs marked off for them, and we were able to park there. So watch out for the apartments. Are going to have to be an issue because we've got all these restrictions, and some of those need to be questioned. Parking is an issue in apartments. Children are a real issue in apartments. As far as people being able to bring their children. The good news is that a lot of times you can use those meeting houses. What do they usually call them? In an apartment complex, they have a community center, not a community center, but a rec room or whatever. Clubhouse type place. Yes. And sometimes you can get those and have meetings there. And so I like that, because even if you have to pay for it, that's a great way to start something and then start inviting people in. But we're up against some issues in these new wineskins, and with HOAs, with zoning, and that's always about parking. Even if you go rent a building, you're going to run into this deal. They're going to tell you how many bathrooms, how many parking spaces, on and on and on. The church I was at in Mississippi just bought, they're in a strip mall, kind of an old one. But they bought the building next to them. It used to be like a Western Auto or something. And I was in there, man, they've built all these walls and they're doing all this stuff. And I'm like, well, how did y'all do this? Because, this, man, didn't the zoning, what about the, he said, brother, this is Mississippi. And he named the little bitty town there, and he said, this is XYZ, Mississippi. He said, they don't care about that here. I said, okay, brother. I wish it was, I mean, they were doing it right, don't get me wrong. So, okay. So think about some of that if you have questions on the legal issue. But I just want to get that in your notes. I want you to be thinking about it preemptively. We got to get ahead of the curve. We need to be ahead of this thing. So let's take a break.